All right, welcome back from the lunch break. We will go ahead and continue on with our next item on the agenda since we've covered all of the timed items. We'll move on to item 7.8. We'll start out with that. Discussion of delinquent property taxes, including A, impacts of tax defaulted land sale, TDLS, deficit sales, and B, development of a low value ordinance. And this will be presented by the Treasurer Tax Collector and Auditor Controller / County Clerk.
Hi, so Patrick Sullivan, Lake County Treasurer Tax Collector. I'm here today with Genevieve Harrington, the Auditor Controller County Clerk. As your chair stated, this item is about tax defaulted land sales and the potential development of a low value ordinance. I realize that we have a few new members on the Board of Supervisors, so if you'd like, I can just give a quick rundown on the history of kind of how we got here. So in Lake County, it was actually about over 100 years ago, there were a series of land speculators who created these large subdivisions. They've been referred to since as the paper subdivisions. They were mostly in Nice and Lucerne. There are some in Clear Lake as well, but they were never fully developed. So they're all these very small parcels, which today now represent very low assessed values. But generally speaking, roads were never connected, utilities weren't hooked up. A lot of them are in geologically unstable areas. They can be on slopes, and much of it's been designated as substandard in terms of zoning. So what that's left us with is that we have these large tracts of land that are on the tax roll as these low value lots, and they receive bills, but there's no real usable value to them, that there's no opportunity to build. There's not really a prospect right now in the current state to move forward with them in a meaningful way where they can be put to use. Previously, the county adopted a paper subdivision management plan. Part of the plan the county adopted was to not sell these lots at tax auction. What was happening was that these lots were going tax delinquent. Once it hits 5 years of delinquency, when someone doesn't pay their property tax, we take it to auction, normally to a Chapter 7 tax sale, a public auction. But what was happening was that typically people wouldn't purchase them, or if someone did, we'd run into the problem that we still experience where someone sees the listing online, sometimes on eBay, sometimes through some other private party site. They purchase the land. They get there, they find out that they can't even get to it, or it's on a hillside, it's a vertical lot, and now they're stuck with it. So that was part of the strategy behind not doing that. Since then, there was a state controller investigation, there was some associated litigation. It basically came to pass that we have to attempt to sell these lots. We can't just sit on them anymore. And that's triggered this new issue that before, by sitting on them, not selling them, we weren't incurring costs. The county now is incurring costs both in staff time and actual costs associated with these auctions. So that sort of sets the stage to where we're at. And so there's two issues we want to touch on. The first is the tax defaulted land sales and the deficit sale that comes out of them. And just to be clear, the deficit sale, what we're getting at is these lots are, let's say, worth a few $1,000s in terms of assessed value. But because of interest and penalties, because they have sat for decades, sometimes longer, the actual tax bill owed that we have to try to collect at the auction is much higher than the actual value of the lot, even if we could find a buyer. In the last auction, almost 80% of our lots received no buyer, no bidder. So typically we aren't even really able to sell these, but we're trying to run them through the motions of selling them. But then when we reduce the minimum bid needed, that creates that deficit that in order to lower the bid to the point where we could actually get a buyer, we're essentially waiving off all of those other taxes and fees that were assessed on the lot, all those interest penalties, the direct charges that can be from sewer, from fire districts, cemetery districts, anyone else. Those are all getting wiped out. So I don't know, do you want to speak to this more about the...
We'll say prorated. The amount collected is prorated amongst all of those amounts, but then whatever's left is wiped out but recovered, whether taken back from the agency or we have to take it from Peter to recover the loss.
Yeah, and maybe just again, because some folks may be new to this, we should touch on teeter and jump in if I get this wrong. But the gist of it is that Lake County is a teeter county. So counties had the choice of whether to adopt the teeter plan. If you chose to adopt the teeter plan, what that meant was that the county fronts the money to these local agencies. So basically we assume like the bill's getting paid, that the bill will be paid, that the county will ultimately recover the money. And the goal is that the agencies are made whole in the meantime, but ultimately the county is going to get those funds back. But now what's happened because of these deficit sales is that we're not actually recovering those funds in auction. There's not enough money.
Well, and take a step back when, because we're a teeter county, we do, well, front the money. So we give the agencies the money before it's collected, and it's based off the certified value, which if it includes uncollectible amounts, we're giving out amounts that we know are uncollectible later, and that gap is getting bigger.
Yeah, and so I would say that in these recent sales, because of the volume, that's what's really escalated this, is that in the past, when the county would do deficit sales, there would be a few like this on each tax sale, each auction, where we didn't bring enough money to pay the taxes. But now, because the goal is to do 1,000 properties each year in the sale, there's more and more deficit sales. So what previously was a small gap is just being greatly enlarged. And then the other issue is because it's sale after sale that exists of these deficit type properties where the amount due is overstated, there's not the opportunity to recover. Usually you would have sort of an ebb and flow and it might wash out, but there's not the new incoming revenue to wash out those deficits. So I think that's what led us to where we're at now. I know the Auditor Controller's Office has the rough estimate. Do you want to touch on that?
I mean, I guess what led us to coming to you today is we finally got through all of the calculations. So to take a step back, when I first came to Lake County, we did, I walked into 8 deficit sales, and that took us about a month and a half. It was a tremendous amount of work. I just got done doing over 200. It took us well over 6 months, high-level management staff, well over, I'd say about $600,000 in county resources to figure out the grand total loss, because they're all losses. And so it's huge. We see it's a problem. So not only do we want to address the problem and the cleanup that needs to happen, but also, as Patrick mentioned, to mitigate it going forward, to make sure that we're not perpetuating this problem and we don't have this again.
Yeah, it may be helpful just to clarify in terms of the teeter plan that explain how the county fronts that money. So what Auditor Controller is referring to is that after these tax sales, essentially the full amount that could be paid out to the agency was paid out. Like the theoretical maximum of what could be paid out is what's paid. And then now some of that money has to flow back now that the calculations are essentially done, right?
So once we've calculated, I guess, the sale amount, prorated it, whatever was there, paid off what we could, and then the difference, because we did already give that out in a prior year, we have to recover that back. A portion of it is covered by our tax loss reserve, so the 1% the county has to cover, and then the direct charge portion the agency is supposed to return. So those are the $2 amounts you're seeing today. So basically, the teeter is expected to cover about 1.3, almost 1.4 million, and then approximately 2.6 million is expected to be recovered from the agencies. And we know nobody's prepared for that. Nobody really knew. We couldn't have anticipated this. I mean, we probably said, hey, bad idea, but we didn't know until just now what the impact truly was.
And so then I guess that leads us to just a discussion of what we're looking at going forward. Because we have this large inventory of tax defaulted properties that are of such low value, if we don't ultimately do something, this situation, this cycle will continue. I just wanted to highlight a few of the statistics that are involved here, and this may shed some light on where we're going. Cost to take a property through the tax sale can cost somewhere between $500 and $700. And some of those are hard costs. There's also the staff time involved. And so it's a bit of a ballpark. But what I think is more important sometimes is that we're pulling people from other duties to do these sales, in which we're getting 80% no bids. And in fact, going forward, the majority of our inventory, a lot of it is in the Nice and Lucerne paper subdivisions where we would expect to receive no bids. So we would incur all that staff time and cost if we were to proceed with the sale in that area, but we would potentially make or recover no dollars. To give an idea of what our inventory looks like as a whole, especially with these properties, we looked at properties that are valued under 5,000 as kind of a baseline because that seems to be where the breaking point is. Properties that are worth over $5,000 in value tend to be more stable in terms of tax delinquency. When you look at the total roll, about 22% of parcels are worth 5,000 or less. But despite the fact they're 22% of the total parcels, they make up only 0.8% of total charges if you include all direct charges like sewer, water, utilities, whatever can be attached to the property. And if you look at the base tax itself, those 22% of parcels represent only 0.25% of the total taxes assessed. So that's about $246,000. This is based off 2022 data because we always have to look backwards.
Expected to not be recovered, correct?
Yeah, so this is the bigger issue is that in 2022, when we were getting, this is back when we were really getting rolling with auctions, trying to increase this volume, 74% of our inventory was under $5,000 in value. Despite the fact we're trying to auction 1,000 properties a year, that's actually risen 4% to 78%. So, and the total number of tax defaulted properties is growing, but the growth is entirely in these low value lots. Properties that are worth over $10,000 are remaining fairly stable. So this is sort of our issue here is that ultimately this is going to swallow us up if we don't do something to change the situation. We can't auction properties fast enough to keep up with it. It also begs the question about the type of properties that are out there. Most of the buyers we have were, potentially duped into purchasing these properties. And certainly one of our most regular calls in our office are people that are asking to turn it over to the county. They want to know if they can donate it. They just want out. They don't want to pay their tax bill anymore. They're paying their tax bill. They want to know what they can do. The county right now does not take that land back. We won't take those donations. So it's also a little weird. And frankly, it puts me in a difficult position if I'm end up forced into auctioning these properties because it puts both my office and the county in the position of perpetuating this problem, which is certainly something I'd like to stay away from. So right now, I think what we're looking for today is to understand the board's position, to get an idea of which direction the county wants to go with this. We've done some of this initial analysis that would indicate a low value ordinance is likely the best route. My understanding is that there's 8 counties left that don't have a low value ordinance. That's why it's hard to find someone else similarly situated to Lake County, because we're just one of the few remaining counties that doesn't have one, and we also happen to be one that has these large developments that are sort of unusable. So I think what we're asking for today is we're seeking the board's direction to support development of a low value ordinance. We have spoken with the assessor's office. Mr. Ford can't be here today. He had to leave for a conference. There'd be some additional work to do to define the unsecured element of a low value ordinance. But ultimately that would be rolled into a final version that could be presented to the board. Just to be clear, there would be at least 2 more appearances with that ordinance in front of the board. So if we were to go forward on this, that would give us the opportunity to work with the fire districts and other impacted agencies to begin to understand the impact that's happened so far and to also understand what the long-term impacts are going to be. These low-value lots have an extremely high delinquency rate. Countywide, our delinquency rate is about 6%, but in the low-value lots, it's depending on the TRA, I think average is 34%, but there's some where it's almost 40% delinquent. So it's going to require a look district by district to understand what the impacts are. And I think the most important part to highlight is the vast majority of this, unfortunately, is going to be borne by a few of the fire districts, because the total amount of tax that's owed is very small, and that's spread throughout the entire county. But it's that $500,000 or so of direct charges that are just really concentrated with fire districts because their fees are typically not based off assessed value. It's a flat fee. So that's why they're going to end up dealing with the brunt of this. But I'd also just highlight the delinquency rate is already so high that not everyone is paying and the delinquency rates are increasing. So it's still a diminishing stream of revenue over time. But yeah, that's, I think where we're at in terms of our ask is that before we spend any more time on this, because it's an incredible amount of work to go through this process and put together the data and pull district by district what we need. If the board is not at least in concept in favor of this idea, we really don't want to spend any more time on it because we're already stretched pretty thin with tax sales. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pat and Genevieve. I wanted to just acknowledge a couple things. One, I know a couple years back, 19 and 20, prior to both of you being in the positions, we were really focusing on trying to get tax sales done again. At that time, I'm not sure if, I mean, we just wanted a sale, I think, back then. And so this wasn't really in the consideration at the time because we just needed a sale to be done. And so then we, noticing the skewed numbers because of these fees basically, or these tax defaulted properties, it gives like a really different picture on what's really valued and all of that, like you mentioned. So it's, I know this is a housekeeping type of thing, and just glad that we're at least addressing it because, yeah, it's going to continue. I know they have a paper parcel plan in the district and whatnot too. So it's just glad to, you know, at least start the dialogue to start addressing these housekeeping issues that you all are bringing forward. So I don't know who's first.
I think he was.
Vice Chair.
A couple of questions. I think I saw that the total number of current tax defaulted lots was 3,500, is that right? I didn't, not in this report, but I think I had that
Oh,
information.
I think according to the most recent data, it's 5,139 is the most recent total of tax defaulted lots that are eligible for auction.
Okay, and then, so 5,100 there, and I know sometimes, you know, more might come next year. What is the total number of lots that are in paper subdivision? Do we know?
So I've actually wrestled with that same question because it's been hard to get a clear answer on that. I know of the 13,000 or so lots that are under $5,000. I want to say 9,000 to 10,000 of them appear to be in the paper subdivisions. So the vast majority of them are in those paper subdivisions.
Okay. And then you mentioned 500,000 in direct charges. Would that 500,000, is that part of the 2.6 million total number that is been paid out to agencies who receive property tax?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Also, just to clarify, that's the annual billing that comes from direct charges. So there, that's what you'd see in 1 year
Okay.
on direct charges, roughly.
my
About
next-
540 is what I last ran, actually.
540.
Yeah.
Because my next question was going to be, the 2.6 million is going back, is it 3 years approximately, or do we know?
The delinquency goes back
Much further?
much further. So we've been working on, so the sales started about 3 years ago, and we can start working on the calculations in the last 3 years, but the delinquency goes back eons.
Okay.
Yeah, some of those delinquencies can range back. I believe we have delinquencies going back into the early 60s that we're aware of. But I think the majority of these, at least as far as we can readily trace, go back 20 to 30 years in the paper subdivisions easily.
Okay. That's it for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the amount of years, because it has been, and I'm glad that we're coming to a point of trying to end some of this that's been going on for quite some time. I think it was Supervisor Owen
Yeah.
and then Supervisor Sabatier after.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Sabatier, because I forgot what I was going to ask.
So this is This is a big deal. I'll start by saying that I'm glad we're having the conversation because, as I stated earlier during our General Plan 2050 conversation, these are issues that have been happening for 100 years and nobody has stepped up with a solution. The idea that has been placed on the table is to do Chapter 8 sales and to sell those vacant lots in the paper parcels to the jurisdiction that it belongs to. So that's the first thing I would like to see is what's the plan to directly sell those properties to the county so we can start controlling the end results of what's happening in the Lucerne-Nice area and to the city for them to be in hold of their own destiny of what's happening to that area. If we're claiming we're losing money, then that should be a pretty simple task for us to say, okay, let's get rid of those off the books. Especially since they've all gone through tax sales, or at least the majority have, and therefore it's the second time around, and we should be able to do that. Because no private person is going to spend the money to develop these. That's why they've stayed there since 1920. And so thank you for starting the Chapter 8 sales. It's taken time for us to get to that point, but I know that we had, I believe, now 2 successful ones. I don't know if that last one was finalized yet, but we did one with the city of Clear Lake and we did one with special districts not too long ago, which has at least helped develop the plan and process on how to do those Chapter 8 sales. I don't know if we did one before, but I've never heard of one happening before this.
I think we've moved about 40 parcels through Chapter 8 in the last 2 years. So there's a long way to go in utilizing that. But yeah, it certainly is a tool that can be used. And I guess that would be a question to kick back to your board is that I know previously when it was looked at the county acquiring properties, I think there was a reluctance for the county to acquire them because of liability and other concerns. I would also note that I think at that time we didn't understand that there was a cost involved in sitting on them. That back then when we looked at it, sitting on them was a viable option, or at least appeared to be. But now we can't ignore them any longer after the state controller intervened. So yeah, but right now I don't have clear direction on what to do with that.
Right, and I think there's the indirect cost of sitting on them, which is wildfire issues, homeless encampments, illegal dumping. There are so many other issues that keeps those areas as blighted as possible to never have value. And so I think that it's on us to make that change, and I think that historically we've been waiting on someone else to fix this for us. So that's the one thing I would love to see how we move forward with Chapter 8 sales to make it as easy as possible to get those into the right hands. Number 2, I'm worried about the 2.6 million, and I misunderstood my conversation that I had with Mr. Sullivan last Thursday. I thought it was based on the bids that were approved, that we received the funds from people who purchased tax defaulted properties, that we handed out those funds and we're recouping. What you're telling me is we're recouping teeter that has been handed out to those agencies over the last 10, 20 years to add up to this, rather than, because that's what I heard you saying today, is that we've been paying them teeter, but then we did a deficit sale where you're not going to get to recoup the teeter. And so now we're recouping money from, I'm going to request, I want to better understand the rules of statute of limitations, because some of these, as you stated, have been since 1950, 1960. I know 30 years was easy to find within the tax defaulted properties. I'm worried about what that number is.
Statute of limitations on penalties accruing.
Asking money back that we gave to somebody with maybe not even a fine print of this may not be the money you actually should be receiving. I don't know.
The agencies.
I would say I think there may still be some confusion, and I guess the Auditor Controller's Office can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is not recovering the ad valorem that's teetered. This is not recovering the 1%. This is only recovering direct charges, which are not teetered.
Okay.
So it's not reaching back to the dawn of time to grab those, the 1%. Yeah.
1%, but it could be a direct charge from 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Okay.
So because we front full amount and then calculate later. This unique situation is again, why it couldn't be anticipated.
And I apologize, I heard teeter being discussed, so that's why I started misunderstanding what I thought I understood, but I think I'm back to what I originally understood. Okay. I would like to request, and of course through the board's approval, we need to have a sit down with all these taxing agencies. Some of the numbers that were shared with me are immense numbers, well, not in the millions, but some agencies are looking at a few $100,000, more than a few $100,000, some as less than $120,000, and goes down and down. And I want to make sure that we don't tip our other agencies that are working in partnership with us to provide services to our community to make sure we can resolve this in a way that doesn't really just tilt them to the point that they can't do the work that they're supposed to do, meant to do, because those are large numbers. So I hope that you can put a meeting together and figuring out what's a good game plan that everyone can better understand what's being asked of them and how to get back to a balance of zero, because I think that's just sending those bills out is going to not come back with positive results.
Right, because in the past, my next step would have been to process a journal and take it, which we've done, but we got to this step and we said we can't do that. And so I would think before we sit down with the agencies, I was hoping for county direction on how to handle this. I didn't know if just processing a journal was the next step or how that would look. So I think we were hoping for ideas on how to handle this before I reached out to the individual agencies.
I think one of the discussions that we had, and one of the points you raised, was the possibility of bringing this back in installments, right? Instead of returning all the funds at once, was potentially spacing out those payments in some respect.
Yes. So
Okay.
one idea was recovering it through future teeter distributions. Those are the largest distributions we give throughout the year. So if I reduced it maybe in 2 installments over the next 2, I'm not sure, or if the county had other ideas on how to handle this. Really, that's why we're here, because we don't expect to just go and process a journal taking all this back from the agency.
And my final comment is, yes, we're going to save ourselves some headaches, potential money, but in the long run, we're taking away possibly from others, as you stated, that a large hit would be maybe on our fire districts, maybe some of our schools, whatever the impact would be. And maybe a conversation, and I'm sure that some people will get upset about what I'm about to say, but we're not compensated for the work of putting out bills for some of these other agencies. Is there a middle ground where we can get paid for doing that type of work, but not reduce it down to zero where they receive nothing, where there's a better balance rather than completely shutting them out just because tumultuous times right now, unknown future? What are the other options that could be on the table?
So I can speak to part of that, and I'm going to kick it over to Genevieve here. There are some other options about cost recovery from agencies that can run through the auditor controller's office for what they charge, but it doesn't necessarily resolve the underlying issue that the tax debt is building up so high that there's no way to even recover the funds for the agency. Because all of the tax debt and county fees get parked in front of those direct charges, even if we are successful in selling a lot, a fire district isn't likely to recover. And like I said, none of the other agencies involved from a fiscal aspect are really going to be severely impacted, other than maybe special districts with some utilities. But like schools, anyone else, it's minimal because everyone else, their share is based off assessed value rather than these flat fees. So they just don't drive up that much value. I think districts, for instance, have the opportunity to bill separately. If we are not parked in front of them on the tax sale, then they could bill separately and they would actually recover the whole amount, even if it meant recovering directly against that property. Right now, because we're in front of them with interest and penalties, like I said, even in a successful auction, we're going to end up getting them cut off. They're not going to get paid. Whereas if they were trying to directly recover, they still might.
Then Supervisor Owen, you were next, and then Supervisor Pyska.
I had wanted to know, and actually Supervisor Sabatier had touched on part of my question. So, but portion of it is, what would these paper subdivisions be best suited for, looking to rezoning, or what could be done? What do you foresee? Or perhaps Miss Maria might be able to have some ideas as far as what would fit that terrain and those ability, what's there for the future, and would rezoning, and if we're getting a clump of them, to put them together or something for a different purpose, where it could be sold as a 5 acre or a acreage, or was it rural lands or rural residential or something along those lines, to make it where we could get something out of it. That would be my question. Is there a way that we can redo this area since we're in the process?
Thank you. Mireya Turner, Community Development Director. In 2014 or 15, the Board of Supervisors did adopt a paper parcel subdivision management plan, and grouping some of those parcels together, merging them, and then selling them as developable lots was one of the options. That is, of course, limited to a certain sprinkling of the parcels that are already pretty near drivable roads or emergency vehicle accessible roads, as well as access to municipal services. Other ideas were to collect those parcels and save them for development of trail systems. So yeah, we're taking a look now at options to maybe move forward to realize part of that subdivision management plan through the Lake County 2050 process, by possibly changing those land use designations from something that is residential to something that is more towards parks and trails. But we're taking a look to make sure that that won't have huge tax impacts or other things, because I'm not sure why they didn't do it in 2008. So we're taking a look to see maybe if that would be a good idea to change that land use designation to maybe open space.
Yeah, and that the parks was something I'd had wrote down as well. I know in Clear Lake, where they have some, there was a little bit of talk when I was with you and Alan about possibly some of those paper subdivisions, kind of converging them and kind of putting a park in possibly. Because obviously they're not bringing any tax revenue in at this point, and they're actually costing us. So whether it be tax or a larger parcel where somebody has room for a home, and so that it can turn that around. But now that we're going through the rezoning, might be a good time to look at options.
Thank you. Yeah, similar to the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, just short of cannabis calls, our top volume of calls is people wanting to develop these paper parcels that they inherited from their great grandma. So we have told thousands of members of the public who either have inherited these parcels or who have bought them thinking they could develop them, all the many reasons why that's not an option. It's real painful for people who think they've gotten this great deal to come to Lake County and live on a little parcel of land with an awesome view, to be told, sorry, you can't even quite get to your parcel. There are no roads, no infrastructure, and yeah. It would be great if we could use it for its higher and better purpose, which would be public access and hiking trails.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Supervisor Pyska?
Yeah, ethically, we need to get to find a solution that works for everybody. But I do see that Chief Cepeda is on, and I know he's one of the agencies, so I was wondering if we could hear from him.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome. Thank you. I've been there for a long time, and I feel your sorrow and empathy. I realize I'm going to be probably one of the hardest hit. I know for my staff, I'm only speaking for Lake County Fire, is that we look at a biannual payment for no more than 2 years based upon the overall amount that we're going to owe. I do like a lot of the dialogue. I know that I've worked with Lars Ewing on some of that Parks and Rec that he has. The merging of lots, whether looking for ag, commercial, light industrial, manufacturing, I think those are great ideas. I just think that for us moving forward, Lake County Fire is to be able to look at trends of property values so that in our capital replacement plan and everything else we have, we can look at 5, 10-year, 15-year increments and what that direct charge and tax is going to be impacting our budgets. But I thank you for your time, and if there's anything that Misha and I can do, let me know.
All right, wanted to bring up one more thing. Pat, you and I had talked before about, and I don't know if this fits into what we're talking about, I just know it fits into the paper subdivision parcel situation. And that was looking for like nonprofits or whoever to do like a silent auction to, suffice these properties as like green belts, trails. I also was thinking at the same time, with the Lake County Recreation Authority, possibly having some sort of interface with that. I know that there's been lots of discussion with some folks in Lucerne and Nice talking about bike trails for mountain bikes and things like that. I know that I think some of them reached out to you, Supervisor Pyska. Just throwing this out there, I don't know if it fits, but just trying to find some use for the lands, and then also just reiterate that discussion we had, and if it even fits when it comes to the silent auctions or whatever you want to call it for those agencies.
So, yeah, there's a few different options that can work in terms of open space for both what you're talking about. I think what Supervisor Owen was referencing is that the use of these lands for open space is permissible under Chapter 8 sales. So we can directly sell them. If the land trust already owns land, let's say in that area, we can do a sealed bid sale where they could make purchases of adjacent properties. But one of the difficult parts, I think, that we've all encountered in the past for this is that these properties all are sort of a checkerboard. There's tax defaulted lots next to privately held lots. So it's sometimes difficult to package them together into a usable amount. There are other entities that may be interested in acquiring them. I know we've made some initial inroads with the federal government, with the Forest Service, but that seems to have stalled out a bit. We've looked at other entities that may be interested. But I think one of the issues is acquiring enough land or setting aside enough in a block to do it. And at some point, I think whether it's for trails or parks, some entity, whether it's public or private, is probably going to have to acquire enough of those lots to kind of build a base. Because even, I know in the past we looked at grant funding for creating trails or parks, often you had to demonstrate that the project was viable. And when you don't own any land yet, when it's all not held by anyone, it makes it difficult as an applicant to really show you're ready to move forward. So, I know that's tough because I know no one's excited to hold these lots, but I think for a lot of the ideas, at some point, someone is probably going to have to acquire some of these.
But,
Go ahead.
but we need an ordinance to deal with this.
Yes, in the meantime, if we don't have an ordinance, this problem just continues to escalate.
Yeah, so that's what we need to talk about.
Anything else before I open it to the public? Go ahead, Supervisor Spatier, or I don't know
Go
who's
ahead.
first.
Supervisor, go.
So in the paper subdivision management plan, it only speaks to the unincorporated, and it speaks about 10,000 properties, but we know that you handle every property in the county. We have approximately 64,000 properties total in the county, at least from last time I looked at the full megabyte printout. Maybe it's 65,000, but it's around that number. There's at least 2,000 more in the city of Clear Lake, so that 10,000 from the management plan is 12. What does that do to your departments? And I guess I'm asking also about Rich's department, Mr. Ford's department, the assessor recorder, by taking out 15 to 20% of the properties that you have to process every single year?
So I know for the assessor's office, I don't want to speak for them too much, but in some respects, this doesn't help them as much as it helps my office. Well, yeah, and it's the assessor's office still has to go out and assess properties to determine whether or not they're going to hit that $5,000 mark. So for them, it doesn't necessarily save them a lot of money. I think where it saves the most, in the most direct way, is Treasurer Tax Collector's office, and then to a certain extent the Auditor Controller's office as well. But in the Treasurer Tax Collector's office, what it mostly means is that I will no longer have to pull people from other duties. Right now, I'm pulling staff off cannabis and transient occupancy tax audits. We're not able to do unsecured collections because of the tax sale. So frankly, this is hindering our ability to get to everything else that we're supposed to be doing. And staff are being pulled off projects that would bring in revenue. So I think that's the frustrating part for us, is that we just, unless we have more bodies, the only way to keep going on these tax sales is to pull people from other assignments.
Extra help, maybe?
Extra help, it may work on some of the other projects we do. The unfortunate part with the tax sales is that it's actually the senior accountant in my office plus Ms. Martinez, the assistant treasurer, and myself that do it, because these tax sales intersect all the most complex issues that we deal with. So unfortunately, we can't really use less senior staff. It requires a pretty high level of knowledge, which restricts who can actually do them.
Just want to, just to mention it, yes, it saves work on our office, but that equates to general fund resources. So it's a county-wide savings. So it might reduce our value appropriately in the beginning, but the county as a whole, I think, will benefit. So I just want to put that in perspective.
Vice Chair was next. Sorry about that.
Well, I just wanted to make some comments. I don't see how we can not be looking at how to resolve this, because obviously we're spending money on, when we know we're not going to recover any money, and on top of that, paying out the direct charges. So we definitely have to address this, but I also want to make sure that, you know, we're working closely with the agencies that are affected and trying to figure out ways where we can potentially help them with the future charges, and I guess figure out a way to phase in any back billing that we have to do, because, you know, particularly with the fire departments, I mean, they have an important mission, and these are significant amounts of money. When we're talking about 500,000, that could be a huge impact. So I just want to make sure we're looking into all that. And I also think that, you know, if we're going to work on this, we should be also actively working on the plan to figure out what we're going to do with these properties, so that gets dealt with and not just wait on it. I think that's potentially something we could work on along with this, and figure out, you know, who might want those, whether it's us owning them and turning them into the trails, or continuing to make another effort with the Forest Service on the North Shore ones. I don't know if that'll work out, but I think there's plenty of other options and opportunities to where we could do something great with these properties and not have this, but definitely think we have to work on it.
Supervisor Owen?
I would prefer, if possible, to examine the option of making them larger and rezoning them to make it larger parcels. The reason why is because their value should increase, and they can have little ranchettes, and the agencies will end up getting some revenue from it. Second option would be, of course, for me personally, would be the trails. I think that's amazing. I just think that our agencies still need to recover some money and be able to plan for that. So, you know, if it's feasible, to be able to make larger parcels.
And this may be more of a question for Director Turner, but generally, my understanding is the only way we can effectively do that is either one of the agencies, like if it's in the city limits of Clear Lake or another entity would need to acquire it, or the county would need to acquire it, merge it, and then flip it back in a sale to a private owner, if
Okay.
that's what we wanted to do. I think right now, while they all simply have the power to sell and are ready for the auction, we can't touch them like that.
Okay.
So.
Director Turner and then Supervisor Pyska.
Yeah, I think we looked at that a few years ago. It could involve an involuntary merger. Additionally, we would also keep in mind that the large majority of these parcels have very steep slopes, very unstable soils, and would require an up-to-date size road to be constructed to access them. So that may be viable for an extremely small number of parcels, but it would be an extremely small number of parcels.
So, I think we need to give direction on how, to work on it. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
had mentioned one more thing. We had talked about the $500,000 in direct charges that won't be billed with the low value ordinance. Keeping in mind 74% of that is likely not to be collected. And also, I just wanted to put it out there. We want to work with the agencies. As was mentioned, they can bill directly. So this is not the only way they can recover those fees. So we have some other ideas that are far less costly on the county to try to help them. So we do need to have conversations about that. So we have ideas. It's just that the tax bill is not the place for that type of billing to occur.
Well, I was just going to suggest that we give direction to work on an ordinance with the agencies, bringing them in for their input, and it's better to have them at the table in the beginning rather than just bring something that we've all worked on for a long time without having their input, which is really valuable, and we need to figure out. We do have to recover those discretionary funds at some point too, so we need to have a plan for that. We need to have a plan or what it looks like when the agencies own all these paper subdivisions again. So there's a lot, I think, that we need to do, but I think the first step is working on the ordinance and bringing the agencies in to help with that.
All right, so I'll open it up to the public so that, because I don't think we've done that yet. So if there's anyone from the public that'd like to come on up?
Tom Lasik, this is more of a question. You mentioned, I think, 3 or 4 times about a low-value ordinance. Can you touch on the high points of what that low-value ordinance would constitute and how that would help the auditor and the treasurer and the county?
Okay. Sorry, I guess there's an alarm system that's been triggered or something, so we need to take 5 minutes. I apologize.
Do we need to walk out?
I don't know what, Susan just told me we need to take 5 minutes.
I don't suppose.
Think about it.
I don't know. Yes, yes. So we're just gonna come back. We haven't addressed whatever the situation was, so we'll go ahead and continue and start. Tom, go ahead and start over, if you will.
Yes, Tom Lasik, thank you, Chair Crandall, Vice Chair Rasmussen. This is just a question. I've heard the term low-value ordinance or something like that. As a layperson, I'm not familiar with that euphemism or what that means, so I was questioning what is in the low-value ordinance or what you're wishing to be in the low-value ordinance and how that would help the Treasury Department, the auditor, and the county on this issue. Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Pat.
You'd like us to respond, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
yes.
So, yeah, a low-value ordinance is what counties pass in order to remove a certain class of properties from their tax roll. Some counties pick $10,000 as the cap, others $7,500, $5,000. 5,000 is a pretty common number from what I've seen. And what that means is that any property that's worth less than 5,000, the county takes it off their tax roll and stops sending a tax bill. Usually what counties look at is in order to send out a bill, there's a cost involved. And then if, let's say, for follow-up, because they're late, we have to send a certified letter that costs $8 or $9. We have to take phone calls, but the bill is only for $20. So as the more time and money you spend on it, the less of a return you get. So 5,000 is often used, but the main cost when we did our review of this is actually heavily incurred on the delinquency side, because that's when we have to pay those larger figures associated with the auction and all the legal costs that go with it. So that's what it does. It removes those from our roll so that those properties no longer get a tax bill.
Hope that answers. All right, any other public comment? All right, go ahead and unmute.
Hello, my name is Chris Jennings here in Lake County. How's everyone doing today? Can you hear me just fine?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I just want to comment on these paper lots. I live in Clear Lake. I live next to these paper lots. There's several hundred paper lots over here. There is a handful of them in tax default. The tax defaults, you can easily go to the GIS and see them all. I like comparing the GIS tax default to the non-tax default. You kind of get a good eye of how many properties are over here. Specifically over in Wilkinson, 10th, 9th, 11th, 7th, those areas. I guess we call it the flats. I just want to say I think it's a pipe dream to acquire all these properties and put them together as large properties. I've been trying to acquire these properties. I have an epithelial water course that runs through my property coming from these properties, and it is an industrial dumping ground. Every time it rains, I have pill bottles, coolant containers, oil containers, everything you can imagine that's probably polluting the water course, dumping into Cache Creek, because I'm not too far away from Cache Creek, which then dumps into Clear Lake, is running through these water courses. And I hate it more than anything. I'm probably the resident firefighter in this area. Every time there's a fire from the homeless, I'm on my dozer, making sure my fire lines are good and secure and trying to do what I can on my part while there's substantial homeless fires happening. I know the 10-year dream is to acquire all these properties and put them together. I think it's that landowners around that expense. The only way we're going to get these properties if we do substantial code fines to acquire these properties, where people basically give up on owning the property because they don't want to pay the fine from the code enforcement from dumping and all the garbage and everything else. And it's just going to take a very long time unless you guys come in through eminent domain and seize all of these properties and put them together and do something, which I don't think state legislation really allows that too easily. But like I said, I've been trying to acquire these properties. However, some of these properties are in a 35-year tax default. So in order for me to try to work hand in hand with the county or the city, because these properties do touch my property, I need to wait for them to officially go to auction for these outrageous prices of $20,000, $30,000. And then a deal can be made with a property owner. I'm a very good property owner. I own 38 acres. I believe my property is immaculate compared to what's around me. I take care of my property. I'm a steward of the land. I'm very fortunate and thankful for what I have. It's just sad to see what's around me. I just want to be honest, and I think you guys should all take a look at this area back here. Take a drive out here and see what it's all about. There's a lot of these hot spots like this, and I don't see all these properties coming in together into multi-acre parcels for a medium income class little ranchettes ever happening, because I've been trying to acquire these properties for years. I have a giant printout from the city that showed me how they're going to work on putting K-rails up, which, you know, we have certain people that rummage around back here that no matter what you put up, what you try to do,
If you
it's
can
never
wrap
going to
up.
stop it. It's unfortunate. Just thanks for hearing my time, and it's a mess back here.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Appreciate your comment. Is there anyone else on Zoom? All right, hearing none, we'll close public input and bring it back to the board. Go ahead, Supervisor Sabatier.
And I appreciate the comment made, and I think that's why action needs to be taken. And I think that the Chapter 8 tax sale is step one, and I think there has to be other steps taken. I know my colleague Supervisor Pyska said, let's move forward and open up for discussions. Absolutely, I concur with that. I think we have to have partnership and conversation about how this is going to impact not just us, but the other agencies as well that benefit from the collection of these taxes, because at least in the areas that I've looked, it's still 70% are paying, the rest are not. And so cutting out that 70% still hurts to those that are collecting from those. While we don't need a plan of it's going to be agriculture, it's going to be housing, I think that's a much further on idea. We have to have a plan about what actions we're going to take on those properties. Because without a plan, we are not solving the true problem, which is the community impact that those communities have on the surrounding and adjacent properties, not just our internal budgets and finances. These properties have historically, at least in my neighborhood, been where fires begin, where all this bad stuff occurs that has greater impact to not just those properties, but everything else surrounding it. So I will not be in favor if we don't have a parallel plan to go along with a low value ordinance. But at the same time, I think we need to have these discussions, or else 100 years later, another Board of Supervisors will be dealing with the exact same problem that we're dealing with right now.
Intertwining the low value ordinance with the other issues concerns me, because it definitely lends itself to being delayed by other discussions. So low value seems to be like a county decision. Yes, 70% of collections on under 5,000 bills will be lost, but the county's losing much more. So it's hard for me to not see it from that perspective. So yes, we want a parallel track where we're assisting the agencies on their collections for whatever they may be losing. But I don't agree with intertwining them. I think the low value ordinance needs to be something our county does to save itself from this mess again in the future. And then separately, the plan for the paper subs, the plan to help the agencies, we absolutely plan to analyze the impact and work with them. I do not agree that those should be entangled together, because then one will slow the other one down, and that's a big concern for me.
Vice Chair?
Yeah. Well, first, I think we need to move forward with discussion about the low value ordinance. But is there a way that we could have another group also working on the plan to deal with these properties? Like similar to Supervisor Spatier's comments, I understand the concern with intertwining them because we have two different issues. So,
Yeah,
So
I guess that would be the question that I have is, I mean, I think our offices are happy to work together with all the stakeholders. But yeah, that would be defining what we're looking at, because we were initially imagining that we would be focused on more the fiscal impacts to these. I think what you're talking about is a broader group, and for that we would probably need community development and other departments to be involved that are beyond just our offices if we're going for a bigger purview like that. That's beyond what we have. That's outside of our lane.
okay, I understand that.
All right. Go ahead.
And I disagree. I think that shifting the burden is not a solution, it's our solution. We need to figure out how to do the Chapter 8 sales, which you are absolutely a part of. No one else can do the Chapter 8 sales. So we have to figure out what our plan is, at least to get those properties in the right hands, because the hands in which they're in right now is useless and not going anywhere. I mean, people don't even know they own the properties half the time. And so I think we don't need a plan of what our development looks like, but we need a plan on how to get those properties in the right hands. And that's going to have to go through your offices in the sense of any Chapter 8 sale or any kind of putting them in the right agency's hands. It's going to require, I really don't care for a specific plan. That will be the city's job to come up with their plan if they acquire all those properties. That will be CDD or the district supervisor's plan once we have access. Leaving them in the hands that they're in right now continues the problem that we have. Just getting them in the right hands is the only plan that we need to have, and it's how we do that. What's the cadence of delivering that? Is it when there's a 3-year that occurs on a tax lien for a code enforcement violation where now you can sell it, but instead of putting it to auction, we just automatically do a Chapter 8. I think it's a lot simpler than it needs to be. There is no need for a specific plan. Once you have access of those properties, we're working on housing, we're working on other things, we might be able to easily deliver and work with developers to get those plans done, but that's not on you guys, and nor should you wait for that.
Yeah, I think we just.
Go ahead. I didn't know if he was going to answer.
The immediate crisis is that we need to,
Yeah, that's what I want to say. If we
Yeah.
just want to stop, the low value ordinance will stop this from
Yes.
going forward. We're extremely motivated.
We need the microphone.
To get paper subs, I mean, and I'm speaking for you, so please, we're very motivated. So holding the low value ordinance hostage essentially isn't necessary. We want to get that going because it's on a separate track. We have to have 2 public hearings, and then the other work would be a different group of people, a different process. So
I think we just want to give you the direction you need to work on this most critical issue right now.
Did you want to answer before I?
Yeah, and I'd just say, I think both of our offices, I know my office is happy to work on any broader effort to determine what those other options are and how to go forward, but certainly that would need to be a broader group, and I think your board would have to designate what that group is, because we can't force those other entities or county departments to participate. So if your board wishes to form some sort of larger group, we're definitely ready, willing, and able to participate in that.
Supervisor Owen?
I was just going to ask your recommendations on how we start this process coming forward. You know what our visions are, where we would like to go, and you're the experts, so what's our first step that you recommend?
I would think it's resurrecting the same kind of group that originally worked on the paper subdivision management plan. That you bring in all the county departments that can have a role in it and get them all involved, and our office can participate in that and examine the different options, because things have changed since the last time that group did get together because of the impact to other entities. I think as Supervisor Sabatier was raising, probably bringing in, the fire districts are the most impacted, and the city of Clear Lake, while not really financially impacted directly, they are impacted in terms of the blight and then the inability to do tax auctions. So I think if you involve those agencies and the applicable county departments, then that would offer the forum for us to work through these issues and come back with real recommendations.
So are you looking at going with the low value, or are you looking at going with the Chapter 8?
I think it would be all of it. So it'd be the low value ordinance that we would go forward on one parallel track, working on that. But then on another track, we would be working as a larger group to identify solutions. Chapter 8 would be part of that, because right now someone has to file an application with my office to request a Chapter 8 sale. So I can't start them. An agency has to request that from me before I can move on it.
Okay, I just want to make sure there's no conflicting.
There's no conflict between all of these ideas. They can
Okay.
all go forward.
Okay,
we'll have to do them all
Yeah.
to solve this big
yeah.
Vice Chair?
So I'm in favor of working on the low value ordinance I would like to bring it back as a separate issue as soon as we can to form a group to start also working on this other issue of
Paper subdivision.
figuring out how to dispose of those properties, how to bring them into our possession, whatever the case may be. I don't want to delay working on that either, but I'm good with giving direction that start the process for the low-value ordinance to bring that back to us. To include working with the agencies, as has been stated by other supervisors, bringing them in right away to have those discussions.
Right, okay. Believe me, I share the same sentiments when it comes to these subdivisions, but I don't think so much has changed with the last plan. I'm sure we could use that as a base. I mean, I know that it's 10 years, 11 years later, but at the same time, as a lot of people in my town halls say, nothing's really changed as it is. So, I mean, you just church it up a little bit and move forward. So I don't know if there's anything else. Do you have the direction you need?
Yes, I believe we do.
Anything
need
else?
a
Did I miss
motion?
anything? No, I think it just says direction. I don't know, Lloyd, do you want to, are we good?
If staff is satisfied with the direction that was provided, that can be provided via consensus.
We wanted clarification on who is bringing back this second item that Supervisor Rasmussen mentioned, which is,
I'm happy to work on that.
okay.
And do we want a committee or?
Well, then we
Well,
would,
We'd have to bring it back to the
Yeah.
board, but I'm happy to start the process,
yeah,
to be involved in that.
I would like to be involved too, if you don't mind.
all right, so can you help me with this? Yeah, I want to make sure.
So that, the supervisors who want to participate in that can coordinate things with staff offline so that an anticipated future board agenda item would be presented for your board.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, that's what I thought. So as for this, right now, you have the direction you need.
Yes.
They'll work to get that moving forward with the admin. Good?
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, so with that, we're going to go into our next item, which we will be going into closed session. We're going to do 8.3, and that is, let's see, conference with legal counsel, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2E1, two potential cases, and with that, we will go into closed session. We'll come out after that, and we'll take care of some of the other non-timed items.